Dear sewing friends, today I would love to share with you how I attach cuffs to my knit garments. Now you can attach your cuffs to the sleeves, let's say if you're sewing a top for example, or you can also attach your cuffs to the pants instead of the bottom hem. Now you see me do that time and time again in my sewing and drafting tutorials because I absolutely love to add cuffs to my knit garments. So right now, let's take a look at the basic steps, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to give you some extra tips and tricks so that way your cuffs will come out perfect. Now here I'm working on the little set for my toddler. This is going to be a hoodie and these are going to be the pants. The last step that I need to complete is to add the cuffs. Now it really depends on what kind of effect you want to achieve and how wide are your pattern pieces and how much wider they are than the wrist, for example, or the ankle if we're talking about the pants. So here, as you can see, I have already cut this piece out. This piece is about 4 inches wide. On the fold, it's going to give you 2 inches, and once attached to the actual sleeve, it's going to be a little bit less than 2 inches wide, which is actually a really good size for the cuff. Now, if we fold it in half like so, we will see that this cuff is about 2 inches shorter than the actual width of the sleeve. Now, that is because the width of the sleeve isn't wide to begin with. If we take a look at the pants right over here, you see that these pants are quite wide at the ankle. Therefore, there is a bigger difference between the width of the cuff and the width of the bottom of the pants. Here, I would say that the difference is about 3 inches in total. Now this is also ribbing. Ribbing stretches really well. So this is not a problem to make the cuff quite smaller than the actual piece of the pattern that you're going to be attaching it, so that way it cinches it in. If you're working with a fabric that doesn't stretch as much, that might be the problem. In that case, you can use alternative as ribbing or some other fabric, so that way you can complete your garment. Or of course you can insert elastic inside as well, but in this case I won't need to do that. So it really depends on how stretchy is your fabric and what is the difference between the width of this pattern piece of the garment where you're going to be attaching your cuff. First thing that you're going to do is you're going to open up the cuff like so, and you're going to place it like this, and we're going to sew this end right over here. So you're placing it right sides together, and we're going to sew this part right over here. You're going to do that on a sewing machine with a stretch stitch or on a serger, whichever one you have. So these are going to be for the pants and these are going to be for the sleeves. First, let's talk about the pants. Here are 2 cuffs. Now what we need to do is we need to fold them wrong sides together so that the seam is on the inside. Match them at the seam like so. And then once you fold them in half, go ahead and make a little notch across the seam, so on the other side of the cuff. So you can either place a pin needle over here or you can make a little notch. I do find that notches in this case are a little bit easier. There we go, especially when we're going to be sewing this in. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to match this cuff with the pant leg. Now I like this seam to face towards the inside of the leg, so towards this side. So what we want to do is we want to place our cuff like so. And then we want to match the inner leg seam with the seam of the cuff and pin it together. And then we want to match the other seam with that little notch that we made on the cuff. There we go. And now we're going to go ahead and sew or serge this together while stretching this out. Now let's say you're attaching this to a sleeve and my sleeve doesn't have a seam right over here. So what you're going to do over here is you can make a little notch for the sleeve. So you fold your sleeve in half, you make a little notch right over here, and you repeat the same steps with the cuff for the sleeve. You fold it in half, wrong sides together, matching at the seams, and then you make a notch on your cuff opposite the seam. There we go. And then you place the cuff on your sleeve, matching this seam with the seam of the sleeve, and then the notch on the sleeve with the notch on your cuff. And once that is done, you're also going to go ahead and either sew it or serge it together while stretching the cuff. When you're sewing cuffs or neck bands, it's a lot easier if the part that you need to stretch as you sew is facing you, so it's up, than when it's facing down. So it's a lot easier when the cuff or the neck band is up. Now this is how it looks fresh off the serger. Of course, you're gonna go ahead and tuck this inside of the seam, but once you turn this right side out, it is going to look like so. Now, if you're not feeling confident about stretching this cuff as you serge or as you sew, what you can do is you can baste it by hand sewing needle and thread before you proceed to that step. Now, I do have a video on how to sew a perfect knit neckband where I do show the step of how to baste it together before you proceed to sewing. So I will leave that video for you guys in the info box below. Now that the basic steps are pretty clear and straightforward, let's go ahead and take a look at 2 extra tips. And before we dive in, I would like to remind you guys that in my tutorials, I'm simply showing you the way that I do things. But as always, find what works for you. There are many ways how to do this or that in sewing, and not only in sewing, in life in general. So practice, experiment, be curious, gain knowledge, and find what works best for you. And the first tip for sewing cuffs is that all fabric is different. So here, for example, I have just jersey polyester knit, and as you see, it doesn't really stretch that much. Here I have sweater knit, and look at that. It stretches so well. Here is double brush polyester. Look at that. This is double brush polyester knit. Look at that. And this is jersey knit. Look at that. So all fabric stretches differently. Sometimes I will use ribbing for the cuffs. Sometimes I will use the same fabric as the main project. Definitely experiment, take a look. Does your fabric stretch enough or not enough at all? And maybe you will need to use some sort of other fabric for your cuffs. Experiment, put it on yourself, take a look. A good visual example is right over here. These are 2 identical raglan sweatshirts for my baby girl. The cuff right over here is made from really stretchy jersey, and the cuff over here is made from double brush polyester knit. So this one doesn't stretch as much, and as you can see right over here, the cuff is also wider as a result. And over here I was able to make that cuff smaller because it does stretch a lot more than, for example, this one. Tip number 2, maybe you're in a situation where you don't have any other fabric choice and you only have the fabric that doesn't stretch wide enough for you to insert the cuff of the width that you want, but you still want that cuff to be pretty narrow and you don't want to settle for a wide cuff. Here's what you can do. Instead of drafting your cuff like this, like a rectangle like we did at the beginning of this tutorial, what you can do is you can draft your cuff like this, where you divide it in half, like right over here, and then you take in ½ an inch, maybe 1 inch, depending on your fabric. And what it's going to do for you, let's go ahead and cut these away. I do this trick a lot with waistbands on the pants. So what's going to happen is you're going to go ahead and sew these ends, and once you fold it in half, as you can see, the bottom part, the part that is going to be attached to the sleeve or to the pant legs, is going to stay the same width. So if you align this and this together, you will see that they're the same length. But the top part obviously is going to be a lot smaller than right over here. So if you fold these in half, you will see that the top part right over here is smaller than over here. So that way you will get a cuff that is narrow over here but a little bit wider over here, so that way you can actually attach it to your sleeve in the case where fabric doesn't stretch enough. Well, my dear sewing friends, I truly hope that this was helpful. Take a look at this other video that you see on your screen about necklines for knit garments. And until next time, happy, thoughtful, creative sewing, and I'll see you very, very soon. Bye!